Hello, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Etta Grace, and today I am interviewing my good friend, Lila Mary, who is publishing her first book soon. It's called The Red King's Mystical Suitors. I have an ARC review, which by the time this goes up will be up last week, and I'm looking forward to interviewing her today. So thank you for coming onto the channel.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you write?
Yeah, I've been a writer for I think like 6 years now. I've always been drawn to fantasy, both writing and reading it. Um, there's always romance in my books because I am a hopeless romantic. I just love reading romance and writing it, and I have a hard time getting into a book if there's not a romantic element. I'm just not that kind of person. So that's what I love to write most.
Awesome. Yeah, and what made you decide to self-publish your first book?
I was talking to some friends who had gone the route of traditional publishing, which is a route that I investigated and tried going down several years ago. But through talking to some friends, I eventually decided that self-publishing would be a better fit for me. Uh, you would just have more control, which I very highly value. Some writers are better at letting control go than others. And this is just where I wanted to start.
That's awesome. Was there anything in particular about the book that you were worried about a traditional publisher changing that you wanted to keep control over?
Uh, I just know that I can be a stubborn person, and I haven't really worked with an editor before. Uh, I just usually I think I know what's best for the book. Of course, that's not always true, and I highly value, bouncing ideas off of friends. And beta readers are a blessing. Like I'm so thankful for all my beta readers. Um, Nothing in particular that I can think I was worried about being changed, but maybe in the future I will go for traditional publishing or work with an editor long term. But just for right now, this was what I wanted to do.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a very stubborn person also, and so that's why I'm going to self-publish one day. But I totally understand where you're coming from there. And I also know, like talking from other writers, that does really well whenever it's self-published. There's some writers who have made a killing by doing that. Not necessarily that money is like the object of all of this, or just to like get your stories out into the world, but romance is a very popular genre within the self-publishing world. So I'm excited to see where you go from here because I know you have a lot of great ideas. So is there anything you wish you knew before getting into the publishing process?
A lot of like little technical things that are, not too important. But I've just learned so much by talking to my friends who self-published, my fellow authors, like R.K. Ashwick. Just talking to her about her experience has really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I never even considered when I would think about what self-publishing would look like. So I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to talk to my fellow authors about it.
Yeah. RK is great. I interviewed them once before on the blog. It's a transcript before I started doing the video thing. But they're fantastic. I really enjoy her work. And that kind of leads into my next question of, was there a most valuable piece of advice that you got from any of your writer friends that advised you going through this process?
That's a very good question. There have been so many great pieces of advice, but uh, probably more to do with marketing advice that I've gotten versus like creative advice.
Mm-hmm.
Some good marketing advice I've gotten is just like the more that you write and the more you publish, the more attraction your books will get. And so sometimes the best marketing strategy is just to keep publishing, which, as someone who has plans to publish a lot of books, that was very nice to hear. And it makes total sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, so if readers find you and they like what you do, they'll go and read through your backlog, and the more books you have in your backlog, the more readers you could potentially attract.
yeah, absolutely. And that series are very popular. Like writers who write series that will obviously attract a lot more readers because they'll keep them coming back. Uh, and I don't have too many long series on my backlog, but I do have a lot of trilogies, so that is something that my readers can look forward to in the future.
Mm-hmm. This isn't an official question in the list, but I know that you have a lot of books. Remind me again the number. How many books do you have in your backlog that you're looking to publish?
That I'm looking to publish is probably around 20. A little less than 20.
That's still a lot more than I have, so I'm very proud of you for that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So on to a couple more questions about the book itself. Do you mind giving us just like the pitch for The Red King's Mystical Suitors? What is the story about? Quick introduction to like the world and the characters and the premise of the plot.
Yeah, so it's about a king named Randall who is brilliant, but very single and kind of melodramatic about it. And his sister decides to take the reins and tell him that she wants to see him married soon. And she invites people from all across the continent to come and get a chance to win his hand in marriage. And there's no restrictions as far as class or job or anything like that. So uh, Randall and his sister are very picky with who will be allowed into the suitor pool, and we end up with 3 suitors who he gets to know, and you get to know them through their own points of view over the course of a few months. But Randall also has a bodyguard who, unbeknownst to Randall, has been harboring secret feelings for him for years. And so, through his point of view, you get to see his turmoil as he's realizing that he's going to lose Randall. And he has to make that choice about, do I stay as his bodyguard or do I cut my losses and keep my heart from getting broken and move away? And it's a journey of all of the characters and the struggles they've had in their past, the struggles that they're facing in the future, the reasons that these suitors want to marry Randall, how Randall feels about all of this, and you see who he ends up marrying.
Yes. So there's a lot of really interesting characters. One thing I really admired about this book was how well you were able to keep all of the different suitors separate. And the fact that there's only 3 of them made it a lot easier to keep track of. But how do you kept all of the different point of views very different as you wrote each of the 3 suitors. And I really appreciated that because it made them all very memorable. So my next question was, which one did you relate to the most or find the easiest to write out of any of the main characters? King Randall, the bodyguard, Burov, or any of the 3 suitors, or even Mora, who I thought was a fantastic character. She was so funny as the nag of a sister, being like, you need to fix this. I thought she was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked all the characters and their distinctions. I really loved Gurov. He was probably the easiest to write for me because he was just so angsty and he was, going through some stuff always. And I don't know if there's a character I really relate to specifically, because the characters are either like very energetic and boisterous, or they're like very sad, and I'm not really either of those. But I definitely relate to Vok in some ways, who is one of the suitors, in ways of wanting to help others and sometimes keeping quiet about his emotions because he just wants to deal with it himself. He doesn't really want to bother other people. He's very independent, and I just value all those qualities.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Burrell was my favorite character by a long shot. He's just so loyal and so golden hearted the whole time. I felt so bad for him. And I really wanted to see him happy because he was just such a loyal guard and such a good friend to Randall. And I really enjoyed reading through his POV throughout the whole book. So that brings me to the next question of, you have a love hexagon going on here, basically, and then all the different ties get crossed in the middle. How did you keep all of those different character arcs and all of the different dynamics between these many characters organized as you were writing? I don't want to say straight because nothing about this book is straight, but how did you keep it like organized as you were going through this writing process?
I had the ending in mind the whole time that I was writing. I knew who was going to end up with who, and what even platonic relationships were going to look like by the end. That helped me keep focus during the muddled parts where it seemed like everyone was kind of dating each other. Um, where I just kept that focus on the ending and knowing what I had to do to get those character arcs there, to make the relationships natural and well paced and believable. So just keeping that end goal in sight was really helpful to me.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And you also mentioned before that you write fantasy, and this takes place in a low fantasy world. And so I wanted to ask about the world building. Was there any specific piece of world building that was your favorite from the book?
I really like the magic systems in the book. They're a mix of traditional magic and alchemy, which alchemy is not something I think is used often enough in fantasy. It's such a fascinating concept to me. Um, and I'm not very big on like hammering out the fine scientific details of world building, but I do like, you know, the connotations of using alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just the way that traditional magic and alchemy mix in the book. Um, there's a big moment I can think of where those two forces have to come together to pull off something really important. And there's a kind of joke that sorcerers and alchemists are rivals, so getting to see those two come together for the greater good in one case was really fun to write.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that scene. And as a chemist by trade, I really love seeing alchemy show up in books because it's like, I do that in our world's magic system. And so I always get to feel a little bit gratified whenever characters are shown, like, using the scientific process to do magic. I always think it's a lot of fun. But that's just me being extremely self indulgent. I'm out of school, and so now I can romanticize all the hours I spent doing homework.
Yeah.
Um, so, are there any specific headcanons or like flash fiction or other like deleted scenes, cryogenically freezing your darlings kind of moments that didn't make it into the final cut of the book that you still really enjoy and wanted to like give a shout out to here?
Um, that's a good question. I can't actually remember how many scenes I had to delete or if there were any. I remember for a long time I was debating cutting this one scene where two of the suitors, Walk and Kohar, are at a sailboat race. They're watching a sailboat race by this lakeside. I just wasn't sure if I could make it work with the pacing and the plot, but it was a scene that I loved so much and I think contributed a lot to their relationship that I knew I had to keep it in.
Mm-hmm.
There is a scene I deleted because it just wasn't contributing to the plot in a meaningful way, where Randall was given a book by one of the suitors, and Burrow was in the room when he received the book, and it was from Burrow's point of view, and he was just very angry in his own way, his subtle way, his internalized way, that someone had figured out that Randall was, he could be charmed if you gave him a book. And Burrow was thinking, oh, why didn't I know that? I wish I could have done that. And sent it anonymously and made him believe that it was one of the suitors.
Oh, that's sweet.
It was a book on magic, if I recall. Right.
I remember that it being mentioned at one point that Randall gets a book from the suitors, but there wasn't like a scene showing the suitor giving him the book. And so that's interesting that that was a scene before that got cut and not just something that like I'm an underwriter, so I'll say things happened, but there won't be a scene behind it. I'm just like skipping over stuff because I'm trying to get to the next point. But I always find it interesting how other people's writing process works, where certain things need to get cut and moved around that way. But can confirm seduction via Bert books.
Yeah,
It's always a very fun trope. You can tell we're writers by the tropes that we use.
absolutely. I'm also an underwriter, and I don't often cut scenes just for necessity of word count. I'm always trying to add more words. Um, and I am guilty of skipping those scenes because I want to get to the next point too. But another big thing is I write scenes out of order. Um, I used to be able to write them in chronological order. I don't have the patience to do it anymore. So
I always write in chronological order, so that amazes me. I would get lost so quickly.
um, yeah, it's always a bit of a tough time editing, but it's worth it in the drafting process because if I have an idea for a new scene, I can just write it and figure out how to tie it in with plot threads or character arcs later on. Just as long as I've got those extra words on the page, because drafting to me is just about getting words on the page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I always try to ask my authors, is there anything that we didn't cover yet that you wanted to mention? So if there's a topic that we haven't touched on, feel free to mention it now.
Um,
Is there anything about the book you're especially proud of that you wanted to bring up?
yeah, I like how I was able to build out, or at least I think, build out these characters all with their own arcs. Even though there was a lot going on in the story, I felt that each character got the screen time that they needed, and even if they didn't get a lot of point of view, at least in the end, their arc felt complete and that they had gotten their ending all tied up. So even if they didn't end up marrying Randall, or if they were doing something else, they made some sort of discovery that led them on a different path, it would still feel believable to the reader. Because I love all these characters, and I don't want just Randall and his future spouse to be the heart of the book. Um, I want the reader to feel attached to all the characters.
Mm-hmm. I think you definitely accomplished that. I know they all had very memorable personalities, and in my head, I had very different like character designs for all of them. Like Vedrick is the redhead, and so I imagine wild curly hair, red hair for them. And Kohar being a magician and Vok having this mysterious past. I had very different images in my head for each of them, and they were all especially distinct and memorable. So I think you definitely accomplished that. So
Thank you. I
thank you.
worked hard to make them distinct so that they wouldn't get muddied up.
Mm-hmm. It's important when you're writing an ensemble cast, but I'm glad that you were able to do that so well. So do you have anything else coming up? I know this book is still, by the time this interview goes up, it'll probably still be in pre-orders, right?
Yes, the release date should be late October. Of course, I'll be posting about that. It should be up for pre-order by the time this goes up.
Okay. Do you have anything else coming up after this book that we can be looking forward to?
My second book is being prepared. It's not a sequel. It's a different book, different world. Um, that has a lot of. It's a fantasy novel. It's a romance novel. It's a lot. It's on a lot bigger scale than the Red King's Mystical Suitors, as far as geopolitics and world building and a spiderweb kind of plot. Um, it's called The Lover with Five Names, and that is going to be. My readers will be hearing a lot about that in the future.
Awesome. And where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me at lilaberrybooks.com, where you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, where you'll be hearing updates and all kinds of stuff about my books and what I'm up to. You can also find me on Instagram at lilaberrybooks, and on Tumblr at Brightflirt Fantasy, if Tumblr is more your thing. So those are my socials.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
Thank you. Hope you have a great day.